I remember sitting any place I could find with strong Wi-Fi, with my laptop open, probably looking completely zoned out, because I probably was. I had 1 hour for lunch, and I'd almost always leave the office, even if I brought my food to work with me. And I'm sure my colleagues felt like I was antisocial, but I did not care. I just wanted to get out of that building every chance I got. So I'd inhale my food in about 2 minutes, leave, open my laptop, and I'd watch videos, take notes, read, and learn about building an online business and try to figure out what I could create on my own. And I am telling you, that hour felt like maybe 3 minutes. I'd look at my clock and think, you have got to be kidding me. In fact, I'd set a timer so I wouldn't run over. So I'd close the laptop at the last possible second, walk to the car, and head back to the job that was paying the bills, but it was becoming so hard for me to imagine being there another week, much less another 20 or 25 years until I was allowed to retire. Looking back, I understand something now about those lunch breaks that I did not understand then, or at least I didn't realize it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just trying to survive a situation that I didn't like, because truth be told, I was not a victim. I applied for that job, I accepted the responsibility, and I accepted the paycheck. But it was to help build someone else's dream. But I started to imagine something bigger, something better for myself than living my life as an expendable part of someone else's operation. That's a terrible feeling. At least it was for me. And if you're trying to figure out how to start a business while working full-time, that distinction matters, because the first move probably isn't what you're hearing all over the internet over and over. It isn't to quit your job. It isn't to get an LLC. It isn't to buy a new course or to announce to the world on social media that you're entering your entrepreneurship era. The first move really is figuring out exactly what you're trying to build. What are you called to build? Who are you called to serve? Because I can't keep doing this and I know where I'm going are two very different statements, and I learned that the hard way. There was a period in my career where Sunday evening would come and it would literally make me sick. And I don't mean, man, I gotta go to work tomorrow. I mean a physical reaction where I felt nauseous, I didn't want to eat, I didn't sleep well, my back started to hurt. I felt fine 1, 2 o'clock while I'm watching football, but then around 5 or 6 o'clock, I felt my body start to change. It was a terrible feeling for me. And maybe you can relate to this part in terms of the experience. There were rules and processes at work that didn't make sense to me or anyone else. Maybe you know what that's like. They only made sense to the suits up at corporate who changed them every quarter in the name of growth. What about the office politics? The people who want to know every single detail about your personal life, as if that's what they were hired to find out or that has anything to do with the work. Or the people who had management responsibilities because they'd just been around a long time, not because they knew how to relate to people or lead. There's a concept. Has it ever felt to you like sometimes being on someone's good side mattered more than actually doing the work, mattered more than your body of work and serving the customer? And I hated feeling like I didn't have any control over it. But despite all of that, here was the reality I created. I had bills, I had responsibilities, and at the time I needed that paycheck. So I couldn't walk in Monday morning with an attitude, toss my badge on someone's desk and say, you know what, I'm out, as much as I felt like it. And I probably wouldn't quit that way anyway. But I was stuck between two things. I knew I didn't want to stay there for one more minute, but I didn't know exactly what the alternative was and what it was supposed to look like for me. And I think this is where people can make really expensive mistakes if they're not careful, because I made them. When you're unhappy long enough, getting out can end up being the entire plan. You start to believe that anything has to be better than this, and maybe it is. But pain is not a very good tool to use to plan your future. In fact, if you think your present is bad now, allowing pain to cause you to react instead of respond can make things far worse for you than they are today. If you're listening to pain, it could make you have a conversation with you that's not healthy. I don't want to be here anymore. Okay, fine. So what do you want to do? I don't know, just not this. Okay, where are we going? Anywhere but here. That's not a plan. And initially, I didn't have a plan either. And around that time, since I like to hang out in bookstores for hours at a time, and actually I still do, I kept seeing this New York Times bestseller that used to drive me crazy on display. It was called The 4-Hour Workweek, and every time I saw this title, it just got on my nerves. I would roll my eyes and say, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Now, I'd never read it, never listened to it, didn't really know what it was about, but apparently none of that prevented me from having a strong opinion on the book. So basically, I judged the proverbial and the literal book by its cover. 4 hours a week. What boss is going to let you work 4 hours a week? And I actually had the audiobook in my account for months before I finally said, you know what, let me go ahead and listen to this foolishness. So I started listening. I listened while I was on a flight. I was flying from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I listened when I got to the hotel, and I could not stop listening to it. And if someone I was traveling with stopped and asked me a question, I'd get annoyed because I had to pause the audiobook. I had this feeling that I can still remember to this day. I cannot unhear what I just heard. it completely blew my mind. Not because I suddenly thought I was going to work 4 hours a week. That wasn't it at all. It was the realization that I had that people were designing work in life by a completely different set of assumptions, with a completely different thought pattern than the one I had accepted. And I also had a feeling of shame, if I'm being honest, especially being raised by entrepreneurs. I couldn't believe how basically institutionalized I'd become. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with working a traditional job if that's what you want to do. So that wasn't what I was thinking at all. It was the fact that I only saw one possibility when I looked at the title of the book. My worldview had become shamefully limited. I had my moment, I was upset with myself, but then I got over it. And that was really the beginning of me working intensely to begin to change my life, especially my mindset. I decided I was not going to put up with the status quo anymore. Now, I was still working full time. I didn't have a business model or an irresistible offer just yet, but I finally understood that the system I was working under wasn't the only system available. And that led me to begin asking better questions. Instead of only asking, how do I get out of this job, I started asking, what would I actually want to build? That sounds like a small difference, but it's not. Because when you're ready for more and you know you're meant for more, you start to ask yourself, what does more actually mean? And that's a critically important question. And I don't mean what more sounds like on Instagram. I mean more for you. Maybe you care much more about having your time under control than having all the money in the world. Or some people want all the money in the world. Good for them. Maybe you want to create something. Maybe there's a group of people you genuinely believe you can serve. Maybe you want your income to depend more on what you can create than trading time for money, or whether someone else approves your raise. And this isn't one of those everyone should hate their job videos. I can't stand those, and this is not it. Maybe you like or even love your career and you don't want to leave it at all, but you know that you're not one-dimensional. You know that there's something else that God put in you that is underdeveloped and you have a yearning to develop it. Maybe you don't know exactly what that is, and that's okay. But to begin moving in the right direction, you've got to start getting specific. And there's nothing specific about more. If you ask your boss for a raise and talk about all the wonderful things you do around here and say you deserve to make more money, and your boss says, yeah, you know what? You don't deserve to be making $75,000. You add so much value around here. Now your salary is $75,001. You'd be angry, wouldn't you? But did you get more? Yes, you absolutely got what you asked for because you weren't specific. You didn't walk in there prepared to give a specific number relative to the value that you feel like you bring to the company. So you got exactly what you asked for. And a lot of people do that in life. They just say they want more, they want better, but they don't define what that is. And because of that, they have nothing that's going to help move them in the direction of what they truly want out of life. And that's something that you have to define if you want your life to change. Because if the only thing defining your future is what you hate about your present, then you can easily build a new life around old frustrations, and that happens all the time. Say somebody hates having a boss, then they go start a business. Well, 6 months later, instead of having one boss, now you have 12. You just call them clients. Or someone hated working long hours for someone else, so they built a business that requires them to work every single waking hour for themselves. They wanted freedom, but they accidentally built themselves another job with worse benefits or no benefits at all. And this is exactly why I don't think the first move is escape, despite what you might hear. The first move is really direction. Okay, now keep in mind, the people, the politics, and everything about my job was the same, but my relationship with my job began to change because my mindset began to change, okay? It wasn't the same old story anymore. And putting up with the corporate nonsense was far easier because I had something to focus on. I had my eye on a prize much more substantial than Employee of the Month or some form letter from an executive vice president that wouldn't know me if they saw me in Starbucks. The office politics that people were playing, they were jockeying to get on Bill or Sally's good side or for promotions. I was jockeying to get out. So instead of just paying the bills, the paycheck could fund what I was learning. The job could give me the time to figure out things without having to force a business I own to pay my bills before the business is ready to pay my bills. This is an opportunity to take your time and develop the skills that could be useful when you're ready to deploy them. In short, if you have the right mindset, you can use your job to actually finance your vision. But you do have a moral and ethical responsibility to do the job you're being paid for, okay? There's nothing godly about stealing time or benefits, but that absolutely doesn't mean that they control everything you do 24 hours a day. So for the first time, I didn't see my job as something that I wanted to leave someday. I saw it as something that I could use to build an off-ramp into the thing that I know that I was called to do. And if you're starting a business while working full-time, this is one of the most important mental shifts you can make. Your job can actually become part of the vision, part of the strategy instead of simply being something that you're desperate to escape. Your current job may not be your final destination, but that doesn't automatically make it your enemy. So let it fund the next thing. Let it teach you something. Use it as leverage to buy yourself time so you can experiment, try, fail, adjust, and try again without making desperate decisions that hurt you or your family, which is never acceptable. And I know there's a whole category of entrepreneurship content out there that talks about burning the boats and quit your job and bet on yourself. I'm not telling you to quit your job to prove that you're betting on yourself. There's nothing about betting on yourself that suggests that you need to be reckless, okay? I know nothing about your financial situation, your health, or any of the other responsibilities that you have, and you shouldn't be letting a video tell you what to do anyway. This is just information to help you make the best decision for you and your family, okay? Build a bridge, but don't burn it once you cross that bridge. That's what I was doing with those lunches, and even though I didn't have language for it yet, I was basically building a bridge. How do I get myself from where I am across to where I really want to be? And Jesus uses a picture of someone building a tower in Luke 14:28. Now, the larger context is discipleship, not entrepreneurship, so I don't want to get it twisted, but the illustration still works for what we're talking about. It talks about building a tower, but first counting the cost to make sure that you have what you need to finish it. Faith is not reckless, and wisdom is not fear. So if you're building a business and you're still employed, just ask responsible questions. What can you test before you leave your job? What skills do you need? What runway or how much runway would make this safer? And is there anybody willing to pay for what you're thinking about selling? Or if sales aren't involved, is there anyone interested in what you're looking to bring to the table? Okay, you need to think of these things before you give up that paycheck that's supporting your lifestyle. Using wisdom and asking good questions is not a lack of faith, it's a demonstration of faith. And I made plenty of mistakes in this area that I don't want you to make. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made was looking at people and feeling like I needed to be more like them to be successful, when that's not it at all. I need to be me to be successful. I'd see one entrepreneur and think that that's the way to go. Then I'd see someone else and like, well, she's killing it every month, so I'm gonna do what she's doing. Then I'd see someone else and think maybe that's the answer. So every 5 minutes I would start, stop, change directions, blow it up, start over, and I just didn't build enough rhythm early enough to really help me get to where I was trying to go faster. It's okay to figure things out and to learn from people, but you're not trying to imitate what other people are doing or who they are. You just use the wisdom that they demonstrate and maybe apply their frameworks to what you're doing. I would look at people younger than me and whose paths looked a lot cleaner and a lot simpler, and instead of comparing myself to them, which I should not have been doing, I should have been learning from them and testing things based on who God has called me to be. So you absolutely should study excellent people. I do that to this day and will continue to. But eventually you got to build your own thing. Models are useful, but clones are unnecessary. We don't need any more cheap imitations. We need what you bring to the table. Maybe you've been on the fence for a long time. You know that there's something that you should step out and try, but you've been reluctant to. Well, one of the reasons that this really became so real for me was, unfortunately, I saw both of my parents at the end of their lives. I saw my father in a hospital bed knowing he wasn't getting back up, and he didn't. And 12 years later, I sat with my mom in hospice until she passed on. Experiences like that change your relationship with time, because we talk about someday like it's an entry on the calendar. It isn't. There will eventually be a year you don't get. There will be a Monday you don't get to start on. There will be a future that you can't punt something you've been talking about for years to. Now, that doesn't mean that you should go make some reckless decisions today because life is short. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I don't want to look back on my life and have any regrets. God forbid I'm ever laying in a hospital bed like either of my parents were, being able to look back on my life knowing that I didn't go for it out of fear, that I didn't at least try, at least stick my toe in the water. Doesn't mean you have to blow up everything, as I've said before, but knowing that I'm called to something greater to not even try would be more than I could take. And hopefully that doesn't happen to you. So here's what I want you to do. Do not make the mistake of asking yourself, should I quit my job? Ask a better question. What am I building toward? And what would I like my work life and my personal life to look like? What do I know? What have I lived through? What can I do unusually well? Or what am I passionate about? And who would be blessed by it? What problem could I solve? Start there. There is more than enough to keep you busy if you just start right there. Talk to one person, write down the idea, publish something. Go online for 30 minutes and talk about it and see the reaction. Learn the skill, make the offer, save some money. Do the things that you already know you can do as part of building the bridge. And you may find that your idea is more viable than you ever thought it was, or people really need what it is you're passionate about, and there are people that you can serve who are praying for someone like you to come along. That is how building the bridge starts. And if you're trying to take what you know and turn it into an online business, but you're struggling to figure out what that business should actually look like or what it should be, that's exactly why I created the Calling to Cash Flow Challenge. We spend 5 days working through that process, taking you from idea to online business, not quitting your job or chasing what someone says is popular this week, but knowing who you build for, what you're building, and how to turn it into something real. So if that's where you are right now, go to callingtocashflowchallenge.com or click the QR code. You already know you were created for more, so give it a direction, give it some energy. I think back to those lunches and I would sit there for almost an hour learning and planning, and it felt like I just sat down. What is that thing for you? What is that thing that you could do whether someone was paying you or not, and hours would go by because you get so involved in it? I wasn't trying to get away from something, I had started to build towards something. And if you know that that's you as well, I think it's time for you to make the first move. Not to escape, but the first move toward the direction you know you're supposed to go. Okay? So go ahead and build that bridge. So I hope this has been a blessing to you. My name is Ralph. Always remember that faith plus work equals success, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care and God bless.